The morning sun painted the Kansas prairie in shades of gold and amber as the Miller family wagon rolled steadily westward. Sarah Miller sat beside her father on the wooden bench, her calloused hands gripping the reins of their two tired oxen. Behind them, the canvas cover flapped gently in the warm breeze, sheltering her mother, Martha, and younger brother, Tommy, from the harsh prairie sun. At 19, Sarah had seen more hardship than most women twice her age: the failed crops back in Missouri, the mounting debts, and finally the difficult decision to sell everything and head west to California had aged her beyond her years. Her once bright blue eyes now held a weariness that spoke of too many nights spent worrying about their uncertain future. "Papa, how much farther do you reckon?" she asked, wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. The heat was becoming unbearable, and the oxen were beginning to slow their pace. Jacob Miller adjusted his worn hat and squinted at the horizon. "According to the map, we should reach Fort Larned by evening. We can rest there for a few days, get supplies, and fix that loose wheel." His voice carried the strain of a man who had been pushing himself and his family too hard for too long. From inside the wagon came the sound of Martha's persistent cough, a reminder of the illness that had been plaguing her for weeks. Tommy, only 12 years old, poked his head out from beneath the canvas. "Ma's feeling poorly again," he said quietly, his young face etched with worry. Sarah exchanged a concerned glance with her father. They both knew Martha needed proper rest and medical attention, but the nearest doctor was still days away. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. The wagon train they had started with had long since passed them by. The Miller family's slow pace, caused by their ailing oxen and Martha's frequent need to rest, had left them traveling alone across the vast, unforgiving landscape. It was dangerous, but they had little choice but to continue. As the day wore on, the heat became almost suffocating. The prairie grass swayed endlessly in all directions, broken only by the occasional cottonwood tree or distant hill. Sarah found herself scanning the horizon constantly, looking for any sign of trouble. Stories of Indian raids and outlaw attacks were common among the travelers they had met, and being alone made them vulnerable targets. Around midday, they stopped by a small creek to water the oxen and rest. Martha was too weak to leave the wagon, so Sarah prepared a simple meal of hardtack and beans while Tommy tended to the animals. Jacob sat beside the creek, studying his maps and trying to calculate how much longer their journey would take. "Sarah," Martha called weakly from the wagon. "Come here, child." Sarah climbed into the wagon and knelt beside her mother. Martha's face was pale and drawn, her breathing labored. The older woman reached out and took Sarah's hand in her own trembling fingers. "I need you to promise me something," Martha whispered. "If something happens to me, you'll take care of Tommy. You'll see that he gets to California safely." "Don't talk like that, Ma," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be fine. We'll reach California, and you'll get better." "You'll see," Martha smiled weakly. "You're a good girl, Sarah, stronger than you know. Your father and I are proud of the woman you've become." She squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "But promise me you'll look after your brother." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She stayed with her mother until it was time to continue their journey, helping her drink small sips of water and adjusting the blankets to make her more comfortable. As afternoon turned to evening, dark clouds began gathering on the western horizon. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain and something else, something that made Jacob Miller's blood run cold. "Smoke." "Sarah," he said urgently, "do you smell that?" She lifted her nose to the wind and nodded grimly. "Grass fire? Could be. Or could be trouble." Jacob urged the oxen forward, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "We need to reach that stand of cottonwoods up ahead. If it's a prairie fire, we might be able to take shelter there." But as they crested a small hill, they saw the source of the smoke. In the distance, black plumes rose from what appeared to be the remains of another wagon train. Jacob pulled the oxen to a stop, his weathered hands gripping the reins tightly. "Stay here," he told Sarah. "I'm going to ride ahead and see what happened." "Papa." "No," Sarah protested. "It's too dangerous." "If there are survivors, they might need help," Jacob replied, already climbing down from the wagon. "And if there's trouble, we need to know about it before we stumble into it blindly." Against Sarah's protests, Jacob saddled their horse and rode toward the burning wagons. Sarah watched him disappear into the distance, her heart pounding with fear and uncertainty. Behind her, she could hear Martha's labored breathing and Tommy's quiet questions about what was happening. An hour passed before Jacob returned, his face grim and his eyes haunted by what he had seen. "Raiders," he said simply, "Apache by the look of it. The wagon train was hit this morning. No survivors." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the heat. "What do we do?" "We change course. Head north toward the Santa Fe Trail. It'll add days to our journey, but it's safer." Jacob climbed back onto the wagon and took the reins. "We'll travel through the night. Put as much distance as possible between us and this place." As darkness fell, the Miller family pressed on across the moonlit prairie. The oxen were exhausted, but Jacob pushed them forward relentlessly. In the wagon, Martha's condition worsened. Her breathing became more labored, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Around midnight, disaster struck. A wheel that had been gradually loosening throughout their journey finally gave way completely. The wagon lurched violently to one side, throwing everyone off balance. The oxen bellowed in distress as the wagon tilted dangerously. Jacob managed to get the animals stopped, but the damage was severe. The wheel was completely destroyed, and several spokes were scattered across the ground. In the darkness, with limited tools and no spare parts, repair was impossible. "We'll have to abandon the wagon," Jacob said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Take only what we can carry." Sarah felt her world crashing down around her. Everything they owned was in that wagon: their food, their tools, their few precious belongings. Without it, their chances of survival were slim. As they sorted through their possessions by lamplight, deciding what to take and what to leave behind, Martha took a turn for the worse. She began coughing violently and blood appeared on her lips. Jacob knelt beside his wife, holding her hand as she struggled to breathe. "Sarah," Martha gasped, "remember your promise." Those were her last words. As the prairie wind moaned across the endless grassland, Martha Miller closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully. Sarah held her mother's still form and wept, her tears falling onto the worn quilt that had been in their family for generations. Jacob sat in stunned silence, the weight of their situation finally crushing him. His wife was dead, his wagon was broken, and they were stranded in the middle of hostile territory with winter approaching. He aged 10 years in that moment, his shoulders sagging under the burden of grief and responsibility. Tommy clung to Sarah, sobbing for his mother. At 12, he was old enough to understand death, but too young to fully comprehend the danger they now faced. Sarah comforted her brother while her mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. They spent the rest of the night in the broken wagon, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn approached, Jacob made the painful decision to bury Martha beside the wagon. They had no proper tools, so they used their hands and a broken piece of wood to scrape out a shallow grave in the hard prairie soil. The burial was simple but heartfelt. Jacob spoke a few words from the Bible, while Sarah and Tommy said their final goodbyes to the woman who had been the heart of their family. They marked the grave with a crude wooden cross made from wagon parts and covered it with stones to protect it from wild animals. With heavy hearts, they loaded their few remaining possessions onto their horse and began walking. Jacob carried his rifle and what ammunition they had left. Sarah shouldered a pack containing their remaining food and Martha's Bible. Tommy, despite his young age, insisted on carrying his own small bundle. The first day of walking was brutal. The sun beat down mercilessly, and their water supply dwindled quickly. By evening, they had covered perhaps 10 miles, but they were exhausted and demoralized. They made camp beside a dry creek bed, sharing their meager rations and trying to stay optimistic about their chances. On the second day, their luck went from bad to worse. The horse, weakened by lack of proper food and water, went lame. Jacob examined the animal's leg and shook his head grimly. "Looks like a stone bruise. She can't carry a load anymore." They were forced to abandon most of their remaining supplies, keeping only the absolute essentials: food for 3 days, a small amount of water, and Jacob's rifle. Everything else, including Martha's precious Bible and the few family photographs they had managed to save, had to be left behind. By the third day, they were all showing signs of serious distress. Their lips were cracked from dehydration, their feet were blistered and bleeding, and their food was nearly gone. Tommy, being the youngest, was suffering the most. He stumbled frequently and complained of dizziness. It was then that they spotted the riders in the distance. At first, Jacob hoped they might be friendly travelers or perhaps soldiers from a nearby fort, but as the riders drew closer, his heart sank. These were not rescuers. The men wore no uniforms, their clothes were rough and dirty, and they carried themselves with the casual menace of those who took what they wanted by force. Outlaws, Jacob whispered to Sarah. Take Tommy and hide behind those rocks. Don't come out no matter what happens. Papa, no, Sarah protested, but Jacob was already moving forward, his rifle in his hands. Do as I say, he ordered firmly. Protect your brother. Sarah grabbed Tommy's hand and pulled him toward a cluster of large rocks nearby. They crouched behind the stones, peering out anxiously as the 5 riders approached their father. The leader of the group, a bearded man with cold eyes and a cruel smile, called out to Jacob. Well, well, what have we got here? Looks like you folks are having some trouble. We don't want any trouble, Jacob replied, his rifle ready but not yet raised. We're just trying to get to California. The outlaw laughed, a harsh sound that carried no humor. California's a long way off, friend. This here's dangerous country. A man needs protection to travel safely. What kind of protection? Jacob asked warily. The kind that costs everything you got, another rider chimed in, spurring his horse closer. Your horse, your supplies, your weapons, and maybe that pretty little girl you got hiding behind them rocks. Jacob's face hardened. You're not getting anything from us. Move along. The leader's smile faded. I don't think you understand your situation, old man. We're taking what we want, whether you give it or not. What happened next occurred so quickly that Sarah could barely follow it. Jacob raised his rifle, but the outlaws were already drawing their guns. The sound of gunshots echoed across the prairie, and Jacob Miller fell to the ground, his rifle firing harmlessly into the air. Papa! Tommy screamed, starting to run toward his fallen father. Sarah grabbed her brother and held him back, clamping her hand over his mouth to muffle his cries. Tears streamed down her face as she watched their father's still form lying on the prairie grass. The outlaws ransacked their meager camp, taking their lame horse and what little they had left. As they prepared to leave, the leader looked toward the rocks where Sarah and Tommy were hiding. I know you're back there, little girl, he called out. You can come out now, or we can come get you. Either way, you're coming with us. Sarah's mind raced. She had promised her mother to protect Tommy, but how could she do that if the outlaws took her? She needed a plan, and she needed it quickly. As the men dismounted and began walking toward their hiding place, Sarah whispered urgently to her brother, Tommy, I need you to be very brave. When I count to 3, I want you to run as fast as you can toward that creek bed. Follow it west until you find help. Don't look back, no matter what happens. I won't leave you, Tommy whispered back, his voice shaking. You have to. It's the only way. 1, 2. But before Sarah could say 3, the sound of hoofbeats thundered across the prairie. A lone rider was approaching at full gallop, and the outlaws spun around to face this new threat. The rider was a cowboy, tall and lean in the saddle, with a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. As he drew closer, Sarah could see that he was young, probably not much older than herself. But there was something in his bearing that suggested he was not a man to be taken lightly. Afternoon, gentlemen, the cowboy called out as he pulled his horse to a stop about 30 yards away. Looks like you boys are having yourselves quite a party, the outlaw leader sneered. This ain't your concern, cowboy. Ride on. Well now, I'm afraid I can't do that, the stranger replied calmly. You see, I've been tracking you boys for the better part of a week. There's paper out on all 5 of you, and I aim to collect. Sarah realized with a mixture of hope and fear that the cowboy was a bounty hunter. These men were wanted criminals, which explained their willingness to kill her father so casually. You're outnumbered 5 to 1, the leader pointed out. You sure you want to try this? The cowboy's hand moved slowly to rest on the grip of his revolver. I'm sure. What followed was the fastest gunfight Sarah had ever witnessed. The cowboy's hand moved like lightning, his gun clearing leather and firing before any of the outlaws could react. 2 men fell immediately. The others scrambled for cover, but the cowboy was already moving, spurring his horse forward while continuing to fire with deadly accuracy. In less than a minute, all 5 outlaws lay dead on the prairie grass. The cowboy dismounted and walked among them, checking to make sure they posed no further threat. Then he turned toward the rocks where Sarah and Tommy were still hiding. It's safe now, he called out gently. You can come out. Sarah stood slowly, pulling Tommy up with her. They emerged from behind the rocks, both trembling from shock and fear. The cowboy holstered his gun and approached them carefully, his hands visible and non-threatening. I'm sorry about your pa, he said quietly, glancing toward Jacob's still form. He was a brave man. stood his ground against impossible odds. Sarah couldn't speak. The events of the past few minutes seemed unreal, like something from a dime novel rather than her actual life. First her mother's death, then her father's murder, and now this violent rescue by a stranger. The cowboy studied her face and seemed to understand her shock. "What's your name, miss?" "Sarah," she managed to whisper. "Sarah Miller. This is my brother Tommy. I'm Cole Harrison," the cowboy replied. "I've been hunting these men for a while now. They've robbed and killed across 3 territories." He looked around at the scene of destruction, the abandoned supplies, the lame horse, the evidence of their desperate journey. "Looks like you folks have been through quite an ordeal." Tommy finally found his voice. "They killed Pa. They killed him for nothing." Cole's jaw tightened. "I know, son. I'm sorry." He looked back at Sarah. "What were you doing out here alone? This is dangerous country for a family to travel without an escort." Through her tears, Sarah told him about their journey from Missouri, their mother's death, the broken wagon, and their desperate attempt to reach safety on foot. Cole listened without interruption, his expression growing more grim with each detail of their misfortune. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "You've had more than your share of trouble, that's for certain." He looked toward the setting sun. "It'll be dark soon. We need to get you somewhere safe." "Where?" Sarah asked. "We don't have anywhere to go." Cole was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing their options. Finally, he spoke. "There's a ranch about 2 days' ride south of here. Good people. They've taken in folks before who found themselves in desperate circumstances." He paused. "That is, if you're willing to trust a stranger." Sarah looked at Tommy, then back at Cole. They had no choice, really. Without his help, they would die on the prairie within days.
"What about Pa?"
"We can't just leave him. We'll bury him proper," Cole promised. "I've got a shovel on my pack horse." He gestured toward a second horse that Sarah hadn't noticed before, loaded with supplies and what appeared to be camping gear. As the sun set over the vast Kansas prairie, Cole Harrison dug a grave for Jacob Miller, while Sarah and Tommy gathered stones to mark it. The cowboy worked quickly but respectfully, creating a final resting place that was deeper and more secure than the shallow grave they had managed for Martha. The simple burial service was conducted by lamplight, with Cole reading from a small Bible he carried in his saddlebags. Sarah was surprised to discover that the tough bounty hunter knew the scriptures well enough to recite appropriate passages from memory. As they stood beside the fresh grave, Tommy asked the question that had been haunting Sarah. "What's going to happen to us now?" Cole looked down at the boy, then at Sarah. "Well, that depends. The Rocking H Ranch I mentioned, they're always looking for good workers. Sarah, if you're handy with cooking and housework, they'd likely take you on. Tommy, you're young, but ranch work might make a man of you if you're willing to learn." "We don't have any money to pay them," Sarah said quietly. "Work is payment enough," Cole replied. "The Harrisons are fair people. They'll give you a chance to earn your keep and maybe save up enough to continue your journey to California, if that's still what you want." Sarah felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. "And you? Will you take us there?" Cole nodded. "I'll see you safely to the ranch." After that, he shrugged. "Well, I've got other business to attend to. But I reckon you'll be fine. You've got steel in you, Sarah Miller. You've held your family together through more hardship than most folks see in a lifetime." That night, they made camp beside Jacob Miller's grave. Cole shared his supplies with them. Real food for the first time in days, fresh water from his canteens, and warm blankets to ward off the prairie chill. For Tommy, it was like a miracle. For Sarah, it was the beginning of a new chapter in a life that had already seen too much tragedy. As they sat around the small campfire, Cole told them about the Rocking H Ranch. It was owned by a family named Harrison, no relation to him, despite the shared surname. They ran cattle and horses, and had built a reputation as honest, hard-working people who treated their employees well. "Mrs. Harrison lost her own daughter to illness a few years back," Cole explained. "She's got a soft spot for young folks who find themselves alone in the world, and the ranch is big enough that there's always work to be done." Sarah stared into the flames, thinking about the life that awaited them. It wasn't California, wasn't the new beginning her parents had dreamed of, but it was a chance. After everything they had lost, perhaps a chance was enough. "Harrison," Tommy said sleepily. "Thank you for saving us." Cole smiled, the first time Sarah had seen his stern features soften. Just Cole, son, and you're welcome. Now get some rest. We've got a long ride ahead of us. As Tommy curled up in his blanket and drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself studying their rescuer in the firelight. There was something about Cole Harrison that intrigued her. A gentleness beneath the tough exterior. A code of honor that had led him to risk his life for strangers. "Why did you help us?" she asked quietly. "You could have just taken those outlaws and collected your bounty." "You didn't have to get involved with our troubles." Cole was quiet for a long time, poking at the fire with a stick. "I had a sister once," he said finally. "About your age when she died. Cholera took her during the winter of '67. He looked up at Sarah. "I reckon if she'd lived and found herself in trouble like you did, I'd have hoped some stranger would lend her a hand." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes again, but this time they weren't entirely from sadness. There was gratitude mixed in, and something else, a feeling she couldn't quite name. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Cole loaded the bodies of the outlaws onto their horses, explaining that he needed to deliver them to the nearest town to collect the bounty money. "Grim work," he admitted, "but it pays well enough to keep me in supplies." He fashioned a crude but functional saddle for Sarah using blankets and rope, allowing her to ride one of the outlaws' horses. Tommy rode double with Cole on his mount. As they rode away from the site of so much tragedy, Sarah looked back once at her father's grave, silently promising him that she would take care of Tommy no matter what challenges lay ahead. The journey to the Rocking H Ranch was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Despite the grim cargo they carried, Cole proved to be an unexpectedly considerate traveling companion. He set an easy pace that accommodated their inexperience with long-distance riding, and he shared stories of his travels that helped take their minds off their recent losses. Sarah learned that Cole had been orphaned young himself, raised by an uncle who taught him to shoot and ride and live off the land. He'd worked as a cowboy, a scout for the army, and finally as a bounty hunter, tracking down wanted men across the frontier. "It's not a life I'd recommend," he told her as they rode. "Always moving, never settling down, never knowing if the next man you track might be faster with a gun than you are. But it's honest work in its way. I only go after men who've done real harm to innocent folks." As they traveled, Sarah found herself watching Cole with growing admiration. He was competent in ways that her father, good man though he had been, had never quite mastered. Cole read the land like a book, finding water when their supply ran low, spotting potential dangers long before they became threats, and moving through the wilderness with the confidence of someone who truly belonged there. On their second day of travel, they encountered a small town where Cole could deliver his grim cargo to the local sheriff. While he conducted his business, Sarah and Tommy waited at the general store, marveling at the abundance of goods after their recent privations. The store owner, a kindly woman named Mrs. Dayville, Patterson took pity on their obvious need and insisted on outfitting them with basic necessities. "No charge," she said firmly when Sarah protested. "You children have been through enough." Cole emerged from the sheriff's office with a substantial sum of money, which he immediately used to purchase proper traveling clothes for Sarah and Tommy, as well as additional supplies for the journey. When Sarah tried to protest his generosity, he waved her off. "And so, bounty money," he said simply. "I didn't earn it alone." "You folks were part of bringing those men to justice, even if you didn't choose to be." That evening, as they camped under the stars, Tommy asked Cole to teach him to shoot. "I want to be able to protect Sarah," the boy explained seriously. "Pa couldn't, but maybe I can learn." Cole considered the request carefully. "It's not a decision to make lightly, son. A gun is a tool, but it's also a responsibility. You don't draw it unless you're prepared to use it, and you don't use it unless there's no other choice." "I understand," Tommy said solemnly, "but I need to know how. We can't depend on strangers saving us forever." Sarah felt a pang at her brother's words. At 12, he was already thinking like a man, taking on burdens that should have been years away. But Cole nodded approvingly. "All right then. Tomorrow we'll start with the basics, but remember what I said about responsibility." The next morning, Cole began Tommy's education with gun safety and basic marksmanship. The boy proved to have steady hands and good eyes, though his small frame meant he could only handle Cole's lighter revolver with difficulty. As they continued their journey toward the Rocking H Ranch, Sarah found herself thinking more and more about what lay ahead. The prospect of working as hired help was daunting, but it was also a chance at independence. She had always been capable and hardworking, but circumstances had never allowed her to prove herself outside the confines of her family. On their final evening before reaching the ranch, as they sat around their campfire, Cole asked her what she hoped to find at their destination. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. "I want Tommy to have a chance to grow up safe," she said finally. "I want him to get some education, learn a trade, become the man Pa wanted him to be." She paused. "As for myself, I don't rightly know. I never thought much beyond taking care of my family." "Maybe it's time you started thinking about what you want for yourself," Cole suggested gently. "You're young yet, and you've got your whole life ahead of you." Sarah looked at him across the fire, wondering what he meant by that. There was something in his expression that made her heart beat a little faster, but she pushed the feeling away. Cole Harrison was a drifter, a man who lived by his guns and never stayed in one place long. Whatever kindness he had shown them, it would soon be gone, and she would be alone again with the responsibility of caring for Tommy. The next day, they finally reached the Rocking H Ranch. It was larger and more prosperous than Sarah had expected, with well-maintained buildings, healthy-looking cattle, and signs of good management everywhere. The main house was a sprawling structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that suggested Western hospitality. As they rode up the main drive, a woman emerged from the house. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes, but there was strength in her bearing that spoke of a lifetime of frontier living. "Harrison," Cole called out as he dismounted, "I've brought some folks who could use your help." Eleanor Harrison looked at Sarah and Tommy with immediate sympathy. "Lord have mercy," she said softly. "You children look like you've been through a war." She approached Sarah's horse and helped her dismount. "Come inside, both of you. We'll get you fed and cleaned up, and then you can tell me your story." As they walked toward the house, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions: relief at finally reaching safety, sadness at the losses that had brought them here, and uncertainty about what the future might hold. She glanced back at Cole, who was unloading their few possessions from the pack horse. "Will you be staying for supper?" Mrs. Harrison asked him. Cole shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to move on. Got business waiting in Denver." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known this moment would come, but somehow she hadn't been prepared for it. Cole had been their protector, their guide, their link to safety. Without him, she felt suddenly vulnerable again. Harrison was already taking charge, leading them into the warm, welcoming interior of the ranch house. "Don't you worry about anything now," she told Sarah and Tommy. "You're safe here. We'll take good care of you." As Sarah followed her into the house, she heard Cole's horse departing. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see him riding away, leaving them to face their uncertain future alone. But deep in her heart, she wondered if their paths would ever cross again, and found herself hoping that somehow, someday, they would. The Rocking H Ranch became Sarah and Tommy's new home in ways they never expected. Mrs. Eleanor Harrison proved to be exactly as Cole had described. A woman with a heart big enough to embrace two orphan strangers, and the wisdom to know exactly what they needed. Within hours of their arrival, Sarah and Tommy were seated at the large kitchen table, clean clothes on their backs and hot food in their stomachs for the first time in weeks. Mrs. Harrison bustled around them, refilling their plates and asking gentle questions about their journey. "You've been through more hardship than anyone should have to bear," she said after hearing their story. "But you're safe now, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." The ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Pete Donovan, was less immediately welcoming. He looked at Tommy with skeptical eyes when Mrs. Harrison suggested the boy could help with ranch work. "He's mighty young," Pete observed, "and green as grass. Ranch work ain't no place for city folk learning on the job." But Mrs. Harrison's word was law on the Rocking H, and Tommy was given a chance to prove himself. She assigned him to work with Miguel Santos, an experienced vaquero who had been with the ranch for 20 years. Miguel, a patient man with 3 sons of his own, understood how to teach a willing boy the skills he would need. Sarah's place was initially in the main house, helping with cooking, cleaning, and the countless tasks required to keep a large ranch household running smoothly. Harrison had been managing these duties alone since her daughter's death, and Sarah's help was genuinely needed and appreciated. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and Sarah threw herself into it with determination. She had always been capable in domestic matters, but the scale of the ranch operations challenged her to learn new skills. She mastered cooking for the large crew of ranch hands, learned to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter months, and even picked up basic veterinary skills for treating minor injuries to both animals and people. Tommy, meanwhile, was blossoming under Miguel's guidance. The older man taught him to ride properly, to rope and brand cattle, and to read the signs of weather and animal behavior that were essential for ranch work. The boy's natural intelligence and eagerness to learn impressed everyone, and within a month he was holding his own alongside riders twice his age. But it was the evenings that Sarah treasured most. After the work was done, the ranch hands would gather on the porch of the bunkhouse, sharing stories and music. Tommy would practice his guitar playing with Manuel, Miguel's youngest son, while Sarah would sit with Mrs. Harrison, mending clothes and talking about everything from recipes to dreams for the future. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Sarah," Mrs. Harrison told her one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant reds and oranges. "And you're not afraid of hard work. Those are rare qualities in a woman your age." "I learned from my mother," Sarah replied. "She always said that work was a blessing, not a curse. It gives you purpose." Mrs. Harrison nodded approvingly. "Your mother was a wise woman. I wish I could have met her." As the weeks turned to months, Sarah began to feel something she hadn't experienced since leaving Missouri, a sense of belonging. The ranch hands accepted her as part of the family, teasing her gently about her cooking and asking her advice on personal matters. Tommy was growing taller and stronger, his boy's frame filling out with muscle from the physical work. But despite their newfound security, Sarah often found her thoughts drifting to Cole Harrison. She wondered where his travels had taken him, whether he was safe, and if he ever thought about the 2 orphans he had rescued on the Kansas prairie. She kept these thoughts to herself, knowing that dwelling on a man who was probably hundreds of miles away was foolish. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it challenges that tested everyone's skills and endurance. The cattle had to be brought closer to the ranch buildings, extra feed had to be distributed daily, and the constant battle against cold and snow required every hand to work longer hours. It was during a particularly severe blizzard in January that tragedy struck again. Pete Donovan, the ranch foreman, was thrown from his horse while checking on cattle in the far pasture. Miguel found him hours later, unconscious and badly injured. They managed to get him back to the ranch, but his leg was broken in 2 places, and he had suffered a serious head injury. The nearest doctor was in Dodge City, a 2-day ride under normal conditions. In the middle of a blizzard, it might as well have been on the moon. Sarah immediately took charge of Pete's medical care, using skills she had learned from her mother and knowledge she had picked up from Mrs. Harrison. For 3 days, Pete hovered between life and death. Sarah barely left his side, changing bandages, forcing fluids down his throat, and monitoring his condition around the clock. Harrison helped when she could, but the older woman was dealing with her own health problems that the stress of the situation had aggravated. On the 4th day, Pete's fever broke and he regained consciousness. His first words were characteristically gruff. "Who the hell told you to fuss over me like a mother hen?" Sarah laughed with relief, tears streaming down her face. "Someone had to. You were being about as stubborn as any patient I've ever seen." Pete's recovery was slow but steady. However, it quickly became apparent that his injuries would prevent him from returning to his full duties as foreman. The broken leg healed poorly, leaving him with a permanent limp, and the head injury affected his balance and coordination. Mrs. Harrison faced a difficult decision. The ranch needed a competent foreman to manage the day-to-day operations, but Pete had been with the family for 15 years and deserved better than to be cast aside because of his injuries. The solution came from an unexpected source. Tommy, now 15 and wise beyond his years, approached Mrs. Harrison with a proposal. "Pete knows more about ranching than anyone," the boy said. "But he can't do the physical work anymore. What if he became the ranch supervisor, handling the business side and planning, while Miguel takes over as the working foreman?" It was a mature suggestion from someone who had learned to see problems and solutions clearly. Mrs. Jennings' assay, Harrison implemented the plan immediately, and it worked better than anyone had hoped. Pete's experience and Miguel's physical capabilities complemented each other perfectly. Sarah's role during Pete's crisis had not gone unnoticed. Her quick thinking and medical skills had saved the foreman's life, and her calm leadership during the emergency had impressed everyone on the ranch. Mrs. Harrison began including her in discussions about ranch operations, seeking her input on everything from supply purchases to personnel decisions. "You've got a mind for business, Mrs. Harrison observed one day as they reviewed the ranch's accounts. Have you ever thought about learning bookkeeping formally? Sarah had in fact been thinking about many things as her confidence grew and her horizons expanded. The isolated girl who had arrived at the ranch 3 years earlier had matured into a capable young woman with her own ideas and ambitions. "I'd like to learn everything I can," Sarah admitted. "Not just bookkeeping, but about cattle breeding, land management, all of it. This ranch has become home to Tommy and me, and I want to be able to contribute more than just cooking and cleaning." Mrs. Harrison smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'm not getting any younger, Sarah, and I need someone I can trust to help me run this place. Someone who understands what the rocking H means to all the people who depend on it." The conversation planted seeds that would grow over the following months. Mrs. Harrison began teaching Sarah about the business aspects of ranching, how to evaluate cattle, negotiate with buyers, manage finances, and plan for the future. Sarah proved to be an eager and capable student. Meanwhile, Tommy was making his own mark on the ranch. His natural aptitude for working with horses had caught the attention of Miguel, who began training him in the finer points of horse breaking and training. Tommy had a gift for understanding animal behavior that impressed even the most experienced hands. "That boy's got the touch," Miguel told Mrs. Harrison one evening after watching Tommy gentle a particularly difficult Mustang. "In a few more years, he could be one of the best horse trainers in Kansas." The praise was well-deserved. Tommy had developed a reputation throughout the county for his ability to work with problem horses that other trainers had given up on. Neighboring ranchers began bringing their difficult animals to the Rocking Head specifically to have Tommy work with them. As Sarah's 19th birthday approached, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that terrible day when Cole Harrison had lifted her from beside the burned wagon. The frightened, desperate girl she had been was now a confident young woman with skills, responsibilities, and a secure place in the world. But despite her contentment with life on the ranch, Sarah sometimes felt a restlessness she couldn't quite explain. She would stand on the porch in the evenings, looking out at the vast prairie, and wonder what lay beyond the familiar boundaries of her new home. It was on one such evening in late spring that her restlessness was answered in the most unexpected way. She was feeding chickens in the yard behind the main house when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Visitors were common at the ranch, but something about these particular hoofbeats made her look up with anticipation. 3 riders appeared over the rise, silhouetted against the setting sun. Even at a distance, there was something familiar about the lead rider's posture in the saddle. Sarah shaded her eyes with her hand, trying to see more clearly. As the riders drew closer, her heart began to pound. The lead rider sat his horse with easy confidence, his hat pulled low over his eyes in a gesture she remembered well. When he raised his head, and she could see his face clearly, Sarah dropped the bucket of chicken feed she had been carrying. It was Cole Harrison. He looked older, more weathered by 3 years of frontier living. But there was no mistaking those steady grey eyes or the quiet strength of his bearing. He rode up to the yard and dismounted with the same fluid grace she remembered, then walked toward her with a slight smile on his lips. "Hello, Sarah," he said simply. For a moment she was too stunned to speak. Cole Harrison, the man who had haunted her thoughts for 3 years, was standing in front of her as if no time had passed at all. She became suddenly aware of her appearance. Her work dress was dusty, her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she undoubtedly smelled of chickens and barn work. "Cole," she managed to say. We didn't expect. That is, what brings you back to Kansas?" He looked around the ranch with an appraising eye. "Business, mostly. I've been tracking a man who was last seen in Dodge City. Thought I might stop by and see how you and Tommy were getting along." Before Sarah could respond, Tommy himself came running from the horse corral where he had been working. The boy, now a young man of 15, had grown tall and lean, his face tanned from outdoor work and his hands calloused from rope and reins. "Cole!" Tommy called out excitedly. "I can't believe it's really you!" The two shook hands in the manner of men, though Cole's eyes held the warmth of someone greeting a beloved younger brother. "Look at you," Cole said admiringly. "I'd hardly have recognized you. You've grown into quite the hand from what I hear." Tommy beamed with pride. "Miguel says I've got a natural way with horses. I can show you if you'd like. We've got some beauties in the string right now." "I'd be honored to see your work," Cole replied. "But first I should pay my respects to Mrs. Cullen Harrison." "Is she available?" Sarah found her voice again. "Of course. She's in the house. She'll be so pleased to see you." As they walked toward the main house, Sarah tried to process the flood of emotions Cole's unexpected appearance had triggered. Joy at seeing him again, curiosity about why he had really come back, and a deeper feeling she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Harrison's greeting was as warm as Sarah had expected. The older woman embraced Cole like a long-lost son, and immediately insisted he stay for supper and spend the night in the guest room. "I won't hear of you camping out when we've got perfectly good beds available," she declared. "Besides, I want to hear all about your travels. It's been far too quiet around here lately." During supper, Cole entertained the table with stories of his adventures over the past 3 years. He had tracked outlaws across Colorado and New Mexico, worked briefly as a deputy sheriff in a rough mining town, and even spent a winter trapping in the mountains when bounty hunting proved unprofitable. But it was the story he didn't tell that intrigued Sarah most. There was something different about Cole, something more settled and thoughtful than the restless drifter she remembered. When she asked about his future plans, he was evasive. "I'm thinking it might be time to hang up my guns," he admitted. "Find a place to settle down. Maybe try my hand at honest ranching." Harrison's eyes lit up with interest. "Is that so?" "Well, there's plenty of good land available in these parts. A man with your experience could do well for himself." After supper, Cole asked Tommy to show him the horses he had been training. Sarah watched from the porch as the two men walked toward the corral, Tommy chattering excitedly about his work and Cole listening with genuine interest. "He's changed," Mrs. Harrison observed, joining Sarah on the porch. "Cole?" "Yes, he seems different somehow. More settled." Mrs. Harrison smiled knowingly. "I wasn't talking about Cole, dear. I was talking about you." Sarah turned to look at the older woman. "What do you mean?" "3 years ago, you were a frightened girl who had lost everything. Tonight, I watched a confident young woman trying to decide what she thinks about a man who's obviously traveled a long way to see her." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sure he's just passing through, checking on us out of courtesy." Mrs. Harrison said non-committally. "Well, I suppose we'll see." That night, Sarah lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Cole's unexpected return had stirred up feelings and possibilities she had carefully buried over the past 3 years. She had built a good life at the Rocking H, found her place and purpose, but seeing him again reminded her of the larger world beyond the ranch boundaries. The next morning, Cole joined the ranch hands for breakfast before beginning his day's work. He had insisted on helping with the ranch chores, claiming he needed to earn his keep. Sarah watched him work alongside Miguel and Tommy, noting how naturally he fit into the rhythm of ranch life. Around midday, Cole approached her as she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. "Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Her heart hammered as she followed him to a quiet spot beside the vegetable garden. Cole removed his hat and ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture that suggested he was nervous about what he was going to say. "I need to tell you the real reason I came back," he said finally. Sarah waited, afraid to hope and afraid not to hope at the same time. "The truth is, I've been thinking about you and Tommy ever since I left. In 3 years of traveling, I never found a place that felt like home the way that evening around the campfire with you two felt like home." He paused, looking out at the prairie as if gathering his thoughts. "I told myself I was just checking to see how you were getting along, making sure Mrs. Dazenak's Harrison had treated you right. But that wasn't the whole truth." "What was the whole truth?" Sarah asked softly. Cole met her eyes directly. "The whole truth is that I've been half in love with you since the day I lifted you away from that burned wagon. I kept telling myself you were too young, that I was too much of a drifter, that you deserved better than a man who lived by his guns." Sarah felt her breath catch. "And now? Now you're not too young anymore. And I'm tired of drifting. I've saved enough money to buy land, maybe start my own ranch. The question is," he paused, his confidence seeming to desert him for the first time since she had known him. "The question is whether a woman like you could ever consider a future with a man like me." Sarah looked at this man who had saved her life, who had been the hero of her dreams for 3 years, who was now standing before her, offering her everything she hadn't dared to wish for. Her answer came without hesitation. "Cole Harrison," she said, taking a step closer to him. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to ask me that question." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. He reached out and took her hands in his, and Sarah felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. "There's just one condition," she said, trying to look serious. Cole's expression grew concerned. "What's that?" "Tommy comes with us. I made a promise to my mother that I'd look after him, and I intend to keep it. Cole laughed, a sound of pure joy. Sarah Miller, I wouldn't dream of separating you from your brother. That boy's like family to me too. As Cole pulled her into his arms for their first kiss, Sarah felt the last piece of her new life falling into place. She had found love, purpose, and a future filled with possibilities she had never imagined. But even as she lost herself in the wonder of Cole's embrace, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that their happiness might be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The frontier was still a dangerous place, and the man she loved had made enemies during his years as a bounty hunter. For now, though, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that Cole Harrison had come back for her, and their future was whatever they chose to make it. The spring of 1871 brought changes to the Rocking H Ranch that nobody could have predicted. Cole Harrison's return had set in motion a series of events that would test everyone's courage and reshape their understanding of what family truly meant. Harrison was delighted by Cole and Sarah's engagement, treating the news as if her own daughter had found love. She immediately began planning a wedding that would be the social event of the county, despite Sarah's protests that a simple ceremony would suffice. Nonsense, the older woman declared. You've earned the right to have a proper celebration. Besides, this ranch hasn't seen a wedding in 20 years. The hands deserve a chance to dance and celebrate. Tommy's reaction was more complex. While he genuinely liked Cole and was excited about having him as a brother-in-law, the prospect of leaving the only stable home he had ever known was daunting. The 15-year-old had grown from a frightened boy into a skilled ranch hand with his own reputation and responsibilities. What about my work with the horses? He asked Sarah one evening as they discussed Cole's plans to purchase land near the Colorado border. Miguel says I'm the best natural trainer he's ever seen. And what about Manuel? We've been best friends for 3 years. Sarah understood her brother's concerns. The Rocking H had become home to all of them, and leaving meant abandoning relationships and opportunities that had taken years to build. But she also knew that Cole's dream of starting his own ranch represented a chance for them to build something together as a family. We'll figure it out, she promised Tommy. Maybe Cole would consider looking for land closer to here. Or maybe Mrs. Harrison would let you stay until you're older, if that's what you really want. The solution came from an unexpected source. Pete Donovan, still serving as ranch supervisor despite his permanent limp, approached Cole with a proposition. I've been thinking about your plans, the grizzled foreman said. Mrs. Harrison mentioned you're looking to buy land and start your own spread. What if I told you there might be a better opportunity right here? Cole raised an eyebrow. What kind of opportunity? Pete gestured toward the vast expanse of prairie surrounding the ranch buildings. Mrs. Michael, Harrison's been talking about expanding operations. There's good grazing land to the west that could support another 1,000 head of cattle. She's got the capital but needs someone she trusts to manage a satellite ranch. The idea was intriguing. Instead of starting from scratch in unfamiliar territory, Cole could partner with Mrs. Harrison to develop new ranch lands while staying close to the support system they had all come to depend on. When Pete presented the proposal to Mrs. Harrison, she embraced it immediately. It's perfect, she declared. Cole gets his own spread to manage, Sarah gets to be close enough to help with both operations, and Tommy can continue his work here while learning from Cole as well. The partnership was formalized within a month. Cole would purchase the western grazing lands with his savings, while Mrs. Harrison would provide the initial cattle stock and operational support. In return, Cole would manage the satellite ranch and share profits with the main operation. Wedding preparations proceeded alongside plans for the new ranch. Sarah found herself torn between excitement and apprehension as the date approached. She loved Cole deeply, but marriage represented a step into unknown territory that both thrilled and terrified her. Her fears were eased by Mrs. Harrison, who took on the role of surrogate mother with characteristic warmth and wisdom. Every bride gets nervous, the older woman assured her. It's natural to be scared of such a big change, but you and Cole are right for each other. I've seen how you both light up when you're together. The wedding was held on a beautiful Saturday in June, with guests traveling from ranches and towns across 3 counties. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her smaller frame. Cole, resplendent in a new black suit, looked more nervous than Sarah had ever seen him as he waited at the makeshift altar Pete and Miguel had constructed in the ranch's main yard. Tommy, serving as best man, kept the rings safe and delivered a surprisingly eloquent speech about family, love, and the unexpected ways life brings people together. 3 years ago, my sister and I lost everything, he said. Today, we're gaining more than we ever dreamed possible. The ceremony was conducted by a traveling minister who happened to be passing through the area. As Sarah and Cole exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges the frontier might bring, there wasn't a dry eye among the assembled guests. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. Miguel played his guitar while Manuel sang traditional Mexican ballads. Pete, despite his injuries, managed a creditable performance of an Irish jig that had everyone clapping and cheering. As the evening wound down, Cole and Sarah slipped away to the small cabin that had been prepared for them on the new ranch site. It was modest but well built, with glass windows, a stone fireplace, and enough room to start their married life in comfort. Their first months as husband and wife were a period of intense happiness and hard work. Cole threw himself into developing the new ranch with the same methodical determination he had once applied to tracking outlaws. Sarah divided her time between helping establish their own household and continuing to assist Mrs. Harrison with the main ranch operations. The arrangement worked well for everyone involved. Tommy remained based at the main ranch but spent increasing amounts of time with Cole, learning advanced techniques for cattle management and horse training. The young man's skills continued to develop at a remarkable rate, and his reputation as a horse whisperer spread throughout the region. By autumn, the new ranch was showing real promise. Cole had successfully established a herd of 500 head of cattle, built additional corrals and outbuildings, and even started construction on a larger house to replace the temporary cabin. It was during this period of prosperity and growth that the past came calling in the most dangerous way possible. Sarah first noticed the stranger watching their ranch from a distant ridge on a crisp October morning. He was too far away to see clearly, but something about his presence made her uneasy. When she mentioned it to Cole, his expression grew grim. "Show me exactly where you saw him," he said, reaching for his rifle. From the porch of their cabin, Sarah pointed to the ridge where the mysterious observer had been positioned. Cole studied the location through a spyglass, his jaw tightening with each passing moment. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Do you recognize him?" "Maybe," Cole replied tersely. "I need to check something." He went into their bedroom and returned with a wooden box Sarah had never seen before. Inside were wanted posters, newspaper clippings, and other documents from his bounty hunting days. Cole spread several posters on the kitchen table, comparing them to mental notes of what he had observed. Finally, he selected one particular poster and showed it to Sarah. "Jack Cordell," he said. "I tracked him down 2 years ago in New Mexico. He was wanted for bank robbery and murder. Should have hanged, but he escaped from jail while awaiting trial." Sarah studied the poster. The man pictured was in his 40s with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. What would he want here? "Revenge," Cole said simply. "Cordell swore he'd kill me someday." Looks like someday has arrived. The next few days were tense as Cole took precautions to protect their home and family. He sent word to Mrs. Harrison warning her of the potential danger, and he made sure Sarah and Tommy knew where the weapons were kept and how to use them if necessary. Tommy, now 16, and nearly Cole's equal in shooting skills, insisted on helping patrol their property. "This is my family too," he said when Cole suggested he stay at the main ranch where it was safer. "I'm not running away from a fight." The confrontation came on a cold, clear morning in late October. Sarah was gathering eggs from the chicken coop when she heard the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders were coming up the main trail, and even at a distance she could tell their intentions were hostile. She ran to the house where Cole was cleaning his rifle, already aware of the approaching danger. "3 men," she reported breathlessly. "The one in the lead matches your wanted poster." Cole nodded grimly. "Get the shotgun and position yourself by the back window. If shooting starts, keep low and don't hesitate to use it." Tommy appeared from the barn where he had been working, his own rifle in his hands. "I saw them coming," he said. "Want me to circle around behind them?" "No," Cole said firmly. "Stay with Sarah. If something happens to me, you're her only protection." The 3 riders approached the house at a leisurely pace, clearly confident in their superior numbers. Jack Cordell, looking exactly like his wanted poster, called out when they were about 50 yards away. "Cole Harrison! I told you I'd find you someday." Cole stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready for instant use. "Cordell, I figured you'd come eventually. Question is, are you here for a fair fight or just murder?" Cordell laughed harshly. "Fair fight? You cost me 2 years of freedom and nearly got me hanged. I don't owe you fare. Then you're making a mistake, Cole replied calmly. I didn't track you down for money. I tracked you down because you killed innocent people. If you want to settle this, we can do it man to man. But if you're planning murder, you should know there are witnesses. From her position at the window, Sarah could see the tension building. Cordell's companions, both rough-looking men who were probably wanted themselves, were spreading out to flank the house. This wasn't going to be a duel. It was going to be an ambush. The shooting started suddenly. One of Cordell's men, impatient with the talking, drew his gun and fired at Cole. The bounty hunter dove sideways off the porch, rolling behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood where he had been standing. Sarah opened fire with the shotgun through the window, forcing one of the attackers to take cover behind their horses. Tommy's rifle cracked from the other side of the house, his shot taking down the man who had started the gunfight. The battle was brief but intense. Cole, using his superior marksmanship and knowledge of the terrain around his own home, picked off Cordell's remaining companion within minutes. That left just the vengeful outlaw himself, who had taken cover behind the well. "It's over, Cordell," Cole called out. "Your men are dead. Surrender now and I'll see you get a fair trial." "Never!" Cordell screamed back. "I'd rather die than go back to prison." The outlaw made a desperate charge toward the house, firing wildly as he ran. Cole rose from behind the water trough and carefully aimed his rifle. His single shot ended Jack Cordell's quest for revenge permanently. In the silence that followed, Sarah and Tommy emerged from the house to find Cole standing over the bodies of the three men who had come to kill him. The former bounty hunter looked older, wearier, as if the violent confrontation had drained something vital from him. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, putting her arms around her husband. "Yes," Cole replied, holding her tightly. "This was the last debt from my old life. Now we can truly start fresh." The bodies were buried in unmarked graves on a distant part of the ranch. Cole wanted no reminders of the violence that had briefly threatened their new life. Mrs. Harrison, Pete, and Miguel arrived later that day, having heard the gunshots, and stayed until they were satisfied that the danger had passed. In the weeks that followed, Cole seemed to find a peace he had never known before. The last connection to his dangerous past had been severed, and he threw himself into ranch work with renewed enthusiasm. Sarah watched him change, seeing the hard edges of the bounty hunter gradually softening into the gentler character of a rancher and family man. Winter brought its own challenges, but they were the honest challenges of frontier life. Harsh weather, sick cattle, and the constant struggle to build something lasting in an unforgiving land. Sarah and Cole worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame together. Tommy continued to mature into a remarkable young man. By his 17th birthday, he was acknowledged throughout the region as one of the finest horse trainers anyone had ever seen. Ranchers from as far away as Colorado brought their problem horses to him, and his reputation continued to grow. More importantly, Tommy had found his calling. He announced his intention to eventually start his own horse training business, with the blessing and support of both Cole and Mrs. Harrison. The frightened 12-year-old boy who had hidden behind rocks while outlaws killed his father had become a confident young man ready to make his own way in the world. As spring approached, Sarah realized she was carrying Cole's child. The news filled them both with joy and anticipation. Their family, which had begun with tragedy and loss, was about to grow in the most wonderful way possible. Mrs. Harrison, now in her late 50s but still energetic and sharp, embraced her role as surrogate grandmother with characteristic enthusiasm. She immediately began planning for the baby's arrival with the same thoroughness she brought to ranch management. "This child will be the luckiest baby in Kansas," she declared. 3 adults who love it already, plus the best ranch hands in the territory as honorary uncles. The baby was born on a warm day in early September, a healthy boy with Cole's dark hair and Sarah's blue eyes. They named him Jacob, after Sarah's father, and his arrival completed the transformation of their little family. As Sarah held her son for the first time, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The burned wagon where Cole had first lifted her seemed like something from another lifetime, a tragic beginning that had somehow led to the greatest happiness she could imagine. Tommy, now 18 and preparing to establish his own horse training operation, proved to be a devoted uncle. He spent hours teaching young Jacob to recognize different animal sounds and showing him the gentler horses in the corral. Cole had become everything Sarah had dreamed he could be. a loving husband, devoted father, and successful rancher. The hard, dangerous man who had saved her life had evolved into someone who found his greatest joy in simple domestic pleasures and honest work. Mrs. Harrison, despite having no blood relation to any of them, had become the family matriarch she had always been meant to be. Her wisdom, generosity, and love had made all their happiness possible. On Jacob's first birthday, the entire extended family gathered for a celebration that rivaled Cole and Sarah's wedding. As Sarah watched her husband playing with their son while Tommy and Miguel's boys ran laughing through the yard, she felt a contentment so complete it almost took her breath away. The frontier had taken much from her: her parents, her original home, her childhood innocence, but it had also given her more than she could ever have imagined. She had found love, purpose, family, and a home that truly belonged to her. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant reds and purples, Sarah Harrison stood on her porch holding her son and watching the most important people in her world enjoying each other's company. The burned wagon and the tears of that terrible day seemed like they belonged to someone else's story now. She had been lifted from tragedy by a cowboy who had become her salvation in every sense of the word. Now, surrounded by the family they had created together, Sarah knew that sometimes the most beautiful endings grow from the most heartbreaking beginnings. The frontier had tested them all, but they had emerged stronger, closer, and more grateful for each other than people who had lived easier lives could ever understand. Their love had been forged in hardship and proven in adversity, making it strong enough to last whatever challenges the future might bring. As Cole joined her on the porch, slipping his arm around her waist and kissing the top of little Jacob's head, Sarah whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected ways that life can lead us exactly where we need to be. Their story had begun with loss and tears beside a burned wagon on the vast Kansas prairie, but it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of love, family, and the courage to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead is uncertain. The cowboy had lifted her from the ashes of her old life and helped her build something better than she had ever dared to dream. Now, as they watched their son take his first uncertain steps across the porch, Sarah knew that the best chapters of their story were still waiting to be written.